First, I just want to address my new shirt. I have been having some finds. So this is from Wicked Clothing. And I feel like this Halloween, I've seen a lot of vintage Halloween designed shirts, and I love it. Because if there's one thing to know about me, it's that I love graphic shirts. I love anything like vintage Halloween, classic horror. I love it all. So, and then this one's a little bit different because it's like a lighter color. I feel like a lot of my shirts, sweatshirts are black, dark blue, maybe dark red kind of thing. And this is a little bit different. So I finished watching Monsterland. So this will be part 2. I did another video after I watched. Actually, I think I only watched a couple episodes because I think they're about an hour long each. Yeah, I'd only seen a couple episodes when I did my first Monsterland video. So before you watch this one, go back and watch that one, but this does have the majority of the episodes. Where I left off was episode number 3, which is titled New Orleans, Louisiana. So right off the bat, when I saw this episode, I recognized the lead man. If you've ever seen New Adventures of Old Christine, which was a Julia Louis-Dreyfus show. I loved that show. I don't think it ran for very long. I loved it. I actually want to find the episodes now. But the guy who played her brother is in this. His name is Hamish Linklater. That's his real name. That's the actor's name. He played a man named Joe, who was a pediatric surgeon. So we meet a woman named Annie with Joe, who is her fiance. They're at it looks like Mardi Gras, some kind of celebration in New Orleans after they've been newly engaged. She runs into somebody who knows Joe, and she reluctantly stops to talk to them, but Joe keeps walking with her son George, and she loses track of them. And when she tries to catch up with them, they had a meeting point, but Joe was not there with George at the meeting point. So she's panicking and running through the crowd and trying to find them. And she finally finds a disheveled, freaked out George. She takes him to go get checked out, and Joe finally finds them, is like, oh my gosh, thank goodness you found George. George ran off. And she's kind of, you could tell she's suspicious of him. She's looking at him like, why didn't you keep an eye on my kid? Why did you let my kid run away? And so she asks George what happens, and George says that he was chased by a black-eyed monster. So then, of course, I think as most people that watched this episode would, they get a feeling that Joe did something to George. So we jump forward 14 years later, and there's a celebration for Joe for a award that he won. And as they're having their celebration, there's a unwanted party guest that pops up on the stage under the guise of making a speech about George, because they did have some of his pediatric patients whose lives he saved. But this one guy gets up and mentions, I think, a name called Julia. And after the party's over, Annie goes into Joe's office and asks about this Julia. And Joe says that this was a doctor that 14 years ago he had an affair with, and he was fired, and that was her brother. So then the next morning when Annie wakes up, she sees the news, and the news is saying that Joe is being accused by multiple children of assaulting them and taking advantage of them when they were under his care. When they're talking to I don't remember who this woman is, like what authority she had, but they're talking to another woman. And at first, he denies everything. And they're like, yeah, of course, you know, the woman, the one woman that they're talking to says in a lot of cases, a lot of times, these accusations are true, but of course not in your case. But pretty quickly, so Joe asks Annie, you know, are you on my side? Are you here to support me? And she says, yes, of course. And then he breaks down and starts to say that he's sick and comes out and says that he did abuse these children and that the accusations are true. So after this, Annie basically starts to fall apart. She starts to think that she's seeing the black-eyed monster that George said that he saw all those years ago, and that he continued to see through childhood that he needed to get therapy for. Because she starts hearing this trumpet playing, and it's the trumpet player from the beginning of the episode that we see in the crowd at Mardi Gras, and she starts seeing him across the street at night playing the trumpet against a tree. There's a rock thrown through her window with the word rapist on it, and she thinks that it was him, so she runs out of the house and goes over to him and asks him, did you throw this through my window? And he turns into a monster with these black eyes and these sharp teeth. And when he attacks her, she knocks him out and pulls him into her garage. All the while, she's trying to get a hold of George, and she cannot get a hold of him, and she's very worried. So later on, the black-eyed, sharp-toothed monster gets out of the garage, and she is able to stab him with an ice pick. And while she's freaked out in her home, worried about this monster, George finally comes home. So George confronts Annie and is like, do you want to have an honest conversation about this? Do you want to talk about what Joe did to me as a kid? And we learn what most of us probably had an inkling of from the beginning of the episode, is that throughout George's childhood, beginning at this Mardi Gras, Joe sexually abused George through his childhood. And Annie, supposedly George told her about this, and Annie blocks it out. In her mind, she genuinely does not have recollection of this, possibly because it's hard for her to reconcile what she sacrificed for a comfortable lifestyle, because previous to meeting Joe, she was struggling to make ends meet, and once she met Joe, who was already a doctor, he made life comfortable for her, but at a cost. And so she turned a blind eye to what he was doing to George and other kids. And now she's having some kind of break where, now that it's public, she's realizing what she's done, and her grief is manifesting itself into this black-eyed monster that she's telling George, I see it too, but George is like, there was never a black-eyed monster for me. The black-eyed monster was Joe. And for Annie, the black-eyed monster is her guilt over what she's done to her child and what her life has become and who she's become. After George leaves, she's hysterical and she wants to get this trumpet playing out of her head, and she thinks that if she busts her eardrums that she won't hear it anymore. So she takes an ice pick and drives it into both of her ears. And at first she's relieved because she can't hear anything, but then she continues to hear the trumpets because the trumpet is in her head and there's nothing that she can do to get rid of it. So at the end of the episode, she follows the trumpet player into this crowd of other black-eyed monsters, which I guess is her version of hell. I was confused at the end, like, is she dead? But I think a lot of these episodes, as we're going to see, they're kind of ambiguous, kind of dreamlike. They kind of leave it a little bit open for you to interpret, which I kind of like. I think it makes it different. So that's the end of that episode. And the next episode is called New York, New York. And this is about a New York oil CEO named Mr. Price. He is responsible for an oil spill in the Gulf. And actually, interesting fact, when in real life there was an oil spill in the Gulf, I was living on the Gulf Coast in Florida. But he's doing damage control for the public and trying to minimize his responsibility in the horrible incident. I have a note in here, finally an episode not dealing with child abuse, because I feel like a lot of these episodes, at least half of them, are about children. And it was refreshing to not have an episode about that again. There's a scene where things kind of start to ramp up, where he starts like hallucinating. He's at a party for his birthday. And I don't know if they say how old he was, but in his birthday speech, he says that he's the same age now as his dad was when his dad died. So there, if you've ever seen Rosemary's Baby, there is a scene that seems to be inspired by Rosemary's Baby, where he starts hallucinating the crowd around him, like the people that he knows. And it's like he's being told that something is coming, something evil, like the Antichrist, like the devil or something. And he pulls a oily feather from his mouth in the bathroom at the party. And he's always carrying around these Rolaids. He's obviously not in very good health. He goes back out to the party and starts ranting in some otherworldly voice. And then at the end, he pees himself. And it's straight out of the scene in The Exorcist where Regan wakes up and goes down to this party that her mother is hosting and has an outburst and then pees on herself. It was just like that. And I don't know if that was intentional. It has to be. But I always like when something new doesn't completely rip off a classic, but like gives a nod to it in some way. I appreciate that. So the next day he has an MRI because he's, like I said, not in very good health. And the doctor tells him that they found a mass amidst his vital organs. And so they wanted to send him to an oncologist to rule out cancer. He gets drunk with one of his employees, his assistant, and starts making some confessions and letting the assistant in on who his dad really was and what a bad childhood he had, and in spite of that became one of the most powerful men in New York. He gets so drunk that his assistant has to carry him to bed, and his assistant is actually a nice person and calls his partner and says, "I can't leave my boss like this," and so he stays the night. But when he wakes up, something is wrong. It is boiling hot in the apartment, and Mr. Price appears to be possessed. So his assistant calls a spiritual healer to come and get rid of the entity. But the entity, when they talk to it, claims not to be the devil but God, but not the God that they would think of. When they think that Mr. Price has been cleared, whatever, what do they say? When they think that he is no longer possessed, they go to unrestrain him, but he grabs the scissors and cuts his own stomach open. And I'm thinking, okay, all this talk about like God, the Antichrist, whatever, this something that's coming, I think that there's going to be some kind of creature, like a demon, that comes out of his stomach. But no, it's an oil-drenched pelican set free and busts from his New York high-rise window to go out into the sky. And At the end of this episode, I think this is a stretch. It's kind of stupid and doesn't come together. But actually, we're going to see that it does tie into a later episode. But I feel like even some of these episodes that don't land exactly perfectly, I still applaud them for the originality, for focusing more on the people who are monsters and the story and making you feel something about the people versus the gore factor. Because I'm not there for the gore. I like that they're original stories and that it's just a different kind of show. So honestly, even the episodes that don't end the way I would want them to, I still have an appreciation for. But like I said, that one, I hadn't seen all the rest of the episodes, so I didn't see how it was going to tie into a future episode. It wasn't a bad episode. The next episode is called Plainfield, Illinois. And this is about two lawyers who met in law school. They have a 12-year-old who is in boarding school, and they are celebrating 15 years together. But they're having marital problems. And the reason is because Kate, so it's Sean and Kate. Kate is bipolar and suicidal. They go to bed after their anniversary after having a fight about Kate being manic. They went to a bar and Kate wants to make out and fool around inside of a public bathroom, and then announces that she booked this fancy overseas trip. And Sean is trying to walk on eggshells, tread very carefully because she doesn't want to upset Kate, but Kate books this trip without checking with Sean, Sean's the only one working. Kate isn't working because of her condition. And so Sean is upset that Kate didn't check with her to see if she could get off of work. But she's trying to go along because it's their anniversary, and Kate is so fragile and she doesn't want to cause Kate to go over the edge again. But everything culminates in a fight about how Sean is sad that their daughter Heather had to go to boarding school, and Kate is upset by this because she feels that it's very accusatory towards her, because the reason that Heather had to go to boarding school is because she came home and found Kate on one of her most recent suicide attempts, and Sean could figure that this was the only way that she could keep Heather safe and Kate safe. So Heather is at boarding school. So after their fight, they go to sleep, but Sean wakes up to water dripping, and Kate is not in the bed next to her. So she goes to the bathroom and sees blood on the bathtub and hears water dripping, but nothing else. And so she assumes that Kate has tried to kill herself again. And instead of looking in the tub to see if she's still alive, she gives up. And you can tell that she resigns herself to the fact that if Kate wants to kill herself, she's going to let her do it. So she goes back to bed and wakes up the next morning and busies herself by cleaning up a wine stain on the carpet that Kate left the night before, because she doesn't want to go and discover her body. And she's surprised when, while she's cleaning up the stain, Kate comes into the room. And when Kate comes into the room, she's very confused. She doesn't know what happened. She doesn't have memories of the night before. But she does have the cut marks on her arms. And she kind of was just starting to look dead. And she is dead. She's undead. She's like a zombie. And Sean is very confused by her appearance and feels guilty and also relief and confusion. So as the episode goes on, Kate, because she's dead and apparently just dying or decomposing very slowly, she starts becoming slower and visibly decomposing more. And also music makes her scream. So Sean can't play music. As they're trying to have dinner, like, Sean has her wear a hat because her hair is starting to fall out, and at dinner her eye falls out into her food. And so Sean puts an eye patch on her and won't let her outside. She's got some concerned neighbors coming to the door, but she just hurries them away. She just tries to keep Kate inside and go about life as normal. She's calling into work. She's running out of excuses to call into work because she just stays at home with Kate and tries to keep Kate, even though Kate is slowly slipping away because she's dying or she's dead. Kate finally has some brief moment where she realizes everything that has happened, and she tells Sean that she heard her come into the bathroom and she wasn't dead yet, but she knew that Sean turned back and let her die, and so she let herself die. And so we look at their relationship on a whole, and we realize that the whole 15 years that they were together, Sean kept trying to pull Kate back to her, and Kate kept trying to run away. Kate kept trying to die, and Sean wouldn't let her go. After Kate at one point does break out of the house and starts walking in the snow and breaks her ankle and crawls to a graveyard, or like drags her leg behind her to a graveyard where she tries to bury herself under the snow, and Sean finds her and takes her back to the house where she keeps her in the basement. And there is a mattress down there for Sean to sleep on too, and that is where they stay. As at this point we'll see that Kate is still living dead and is very much more decomposed than the last time that we saw her. And she's just a mindless zombie. She can't even talk at this point because she's so decomposed. And watching this, I just think of how sick and sad and in a twisted way beautiful the devotion that Sean has to Kate. She gave up everything for Kate to try and keep her alive, and in the end she couldn't do it, but I mean, she gave up a lot for that relationship. At the end of the episode, her daughter Heather comes home from break from boarding school, and Sean runs up from the basement. She's filthy and, according to Heather, stinks very badly. And Sean keeps Heather upstairs, and they sit at the table, and Heather tells Sean that she would be so proud of her that she's joined the debate team at her boarding school. And at the end of the episode, we just see Sean teary-eyed looking at Heather and seeing Kate in her, because Kate was the one that was pregnant with Heather. And she's just looking at her and seeing Kate in her. And we see Sean listening to Heather talking about trying to have a debate with her old mom, and then the episode ends. So I think that was a good episode. It was a very original idea, and once again it focuses on, I mean, there is a horror factor, which I appreciate. I mean, that's why I was watching the show. But it focuses on how so messed up and sad and broken and deeply messed up people are. And I like that is the focus.